Hello, and welcome to Overthinking Eurovision. I'm Matt Rather. In 2022, Norway urged us to give that wolf a banana before something terrible happened. But we were foolish, and we wanted to keep all those yummy bananas for ourselves. 2 years later, Norway is back with another song about a wolf, and it is making good on subwoofers' dire premonitions. Suddenly, the banana deal isn't looking so bad, is it? Just a quick note up top. This will mark the third year in a row that we have covered Norway. And I know what y'all are going to say. Hey, what gives? Are you guys just Henrik Ibsen stans or something? I mean, first of all, yes. Just look at his beard. But the truth is that Norway has been just super interesting recently. We had to do the banana song. We just had to. And then the pirate song was on my jogging playlist all winter. And now, Norway is sending its first song in Norwegian since 2006. And it's not just in Norwegian. It's based on a medieval Norwegian folk song. It features old-timey Norwegian instruments, and even the style of singing is traditional. And you might think the inclusion of the metal band is a distinctly non-traditional touch. But remember, this is Norway, which is one of the most metal countries on Earth. For Norway, shredding on an electric guitar is as traditional as wailing on a bagpipe in Scotland. Wait, sorry, what is Guernsey? That's not a real place. Okay, let's see. It is the largest island in the bailiwick of Guernsey. Okay, what is a bailiwick? You know what? Never mind. So this is the most folk Norway has been in a long time. But for a while now, Norway has actually been, you might call it, down to folk. Let's roll it back to 2006, the last time Norway had a song in Norwegian. In Melody Grand Prix that year, there were 18 entries competing for the impossible job of having to top Wigwam's performance from the year before. You are the only one! Only one of the 18 was in the Norwegian language, and like Ulveham, it was aggressively Norwegian. Alviddon translates to elf dance, and weirdly, it did not feature much dancing. But they had not one, but two fiddle players in cocktail dresses. So you've got the traditional elements like the fiddle and the language, but then you've got modern pop instrumentation layered over that. Well, it was modern in 2006. Then in 2009, Norway decided to folk even harder and won the whole enchilada with a stone-cold classic. One crucial thing to point out, though, it's in English, which is not very folky, but you can't argue with success. Fun fact, Alexander Rybak's debut album included a cover of the Proclaimers song, 500 Miles.
Yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you.
For the next 10 years, Norway didn't send anything folky to Eurovision. Then in 2018, Alexander Rybak was back. You might have assumed this was going to be another throwback, back. But interestingly, I don't know if I would call this one folk at all. Even when Rybak plays the fiddle, it's more jazz than anything else. And this is a perfect opportunity to humble brag that when we reviewed this song, he commented on the video. And that makes us almost friends. Hey, Alex. Anyway, if Alexander Rybak had given up on folk, then maybe Norway had really turned against tradition for good. There was only one song at Melody Grand Prix 2018 in Norwegian, and it didn't feel very Norwegian at all. But something happened in 2018 that may have changed the course of Norwegian folk history. Stjernekamp is a singing competition show in which the singers have to switch up genres every week. The winner that year was Ella Maria Hatta Isaksen, a 20-year-old of Sami descent. The Sami are an indigenous people of Scandinavia who unfortunately have been discriminated against for hundreds of years, which is basically the plot of Frozen 2, right? No, seriously, I'm not kidding. Check out this article. So, a Sami singer winning a huge national talent show was an historic moment. Ella Marie had won the Sami Grand Prix back in 2017. But it's one thing to win a competition against other Sami singers, and a very different thing to slay a cover of Dua Lipa in front of a massive television audience. Ella Marie was outspoken about her heritage, and she showed Norway that the traditional Sami style known as joik singing didn't have to be that traditional. And that set the table for Melody Grand Prix 2019, which was a milestone both for the Sami and for bald men like me. Kaino seemed to be a perfect mix of dance-friendly pop with a little bit of folk sprinkled on top, and Euro fans loved it. It actually won the popular vote that year. And ever since Kaino, folk has been a big presence at Melody Grand Prix. In fact, if you want a really simple explanation of why Gato won this year, consider this. In 2021, there were 5 songs with Norwegian folk influences. In 2024, there was only this one. Folk fans didn't split their votes this time, and that helped Ulveham break away from the pack. That's a little wolf joke, by the way. So folk is having a moment in Norway. The question is, why? I mean, look at the UK. Britain has a long and rich tradition of folk music, everything from Morris dancing to brass bands to sea shanties. You would think the Wellerman craze of 2020 would be a big green light for the UK. But the UK hasn't sent a folk song to Eurovision since, I don't know if Engelbert Humperdinck counts, but it's been a while. Ditto Germany and Italy, which are obviously 2 nations renowned for their folk music. So is there a logic behind it? Can we come up with a theory of why some nations are more inclined to folk at Eurovision? Well, first off, I think it's clear that when a country feels threatened, its people turn to folk music as an expression of national unity. Ukraine, I'm looking at you here. In addition to 1944 and Stefania, we've gotten Shum and this year's song, Teresa and Maria. When Ukraine gets back to sending bubblegum pop numbers like they used to, we'll know the country feels out of the woods. It can't happen soon enough. The second factor that might determine a country's likelihood of sending folk to Eurovision is its diversity. The less diverse a nation is, the more likely it is to unify around a folk style. Look at this chart comparing the ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversities of Norway versus the Big Five. Lower bars mean less diverse. You can see that Norway is a much more homogeneous country overall. To understand why a diverse nation might send less folk music to Eurovision, just take a look at Spain. It's made up of a bunch of distinct ethnic groups with their own languages and traditions. As we saw at Benidorm 2022, a song that really connects with one subculture might not speak for the entire nation. But we think there's a third factor that determines how inclined a nation is to folk. Every nation in the world has folk music. Actually, every nation has many folk musics representing different time periods, ethnic groups, regions, etc. But not every nation has folk music that dovetails nicely with its national identity. Let me use America as an example. We've got a ton of folk music over here. Fife and drum, polka, gospel, Native American chants. But there's one type of folk music that has transcended subculture and come to stand for the United States itself. Mamas, let your boys be country. Now you might argue that modern country music isn't folk. Maybe not, but it absolutely is the American version of turbo folk, to use an Eastern European term. You've got traditional instruments like slide guitars and harmonicas, traditional costumes like the cowboy hat and the boots, but most importantly, this is a music that reflects a vision of America, an American tradition that a lot of Americans love. Let 'em ride round in trucks, making back road noise. Part of the appeal is that it evokes a romantic, quasi-mythical era in American history.
Why, Johnny Ringo, you look like somebody just walked over your grave.
The Old West, a time of rugged individualists who wore guns everywhere. But more than that, the lyrics of many country songs are carefully crafted to tap into a national sense of identity that's almost older than America itself. Look at this video for Blake Shelton's God's Country.
Right outside of this one church town, there's a gold dirt road to a whole lot of nothing.
We're 2 lines in, and we already have this sense of manifest destiny. We have this glorification of small-town life. We have this stock footage involving the Dust Bowl. Like many country songs, it conjures up a picture of hardworking, simple, pious, Jeffersonian yeoman farmers.
We turn the dirt and work until the week's done.
Is this actually true of most Americans? I mean, look at me, bro. The most manual labor I've done is hand grinding my own coffee. But it's a powerful myth that appeals to a big slice of the nation.
We'll try that in a small town.
But it's important to note something here. It's not like there just happened to be this random conception of what it means to be an American, and country music just randomly happens to fit that template. The idea of the cowboy as the quintessential American is a myth that holds rural life superior to city life. And maybe not so coincidentally, cities have always been the stomping grounds of liberals, minorities, immigrants, and cultural elites. Country music was deliberately engineered to be ultra-patriotic as a way of ensuring people who identify with country music that this is their nation. And it's such a potent cultural force here that even people who drive to work every day on an 8-lane highway do it in an overpriced pickup truck wearing a Morgan Wallen t-shirt. So for better or for worse, country music won a culture war to be America's soundtrack. That means it's no longer just part of some subculture. It allows us to harness a shared sense of national identity. Much like Lil Nas X harnessed that horse right there. Okay, so let's look at Europe now. France certainly has folk music. For instance, Corsican opera. And there's Foulaine, written in the Breton language. Both those songs represented really cool subcultures, but neither song was aligned with the national image France had for itself. Think about what you think about when you think about France. Exactly. France emerged from the messiness of the Napoleonic era to become what Walter Benjamin called the capital of the 19th century. It was the most cultured city, the most beautiful city, the most fattening city. How do French women stay so thin? When we think of the Platonic idea of France, we think about the Paris of Moulin Rouge, Jean-Paul Sartre, and of course, Edith Piaf. Maybe this chanson music is the French equivalent of country music for Americans. It's music that captures an idealized national image. At least, it captures an idealized national image for a certain group of people, and they were pretty successful at making it synonymous with the nation as a whole. And not coincidentally, France keeps trying to send something in this style to Eurovision. One caveat here. It's possible that I'm confusing the way the rest of the world sees France and the way France sees itself. In the case of America, we like to think of ourselves as a bunch of cowboys, which is also how the rest of the world sees us. And I'm assuming that the French see themselves as sophisticated, sexy Parisians, and music with an early 20th century vibe reinforces that. But I might be wrong, and the only reason the French keep sending songs like this is to play into the stereotypes of the rest of the world, even though they themselves don't really love chanson music any more than they love mimes. Now think about the UK. I would argue that the UK's golden age that sticks in the imagination is the Victorian era. Big Ben, Sherlock Holmes, Charles Dickens, it's this Platonic Britain of the mind. The problem is that there isn't really a folk music that evokes this time and place. I'm not exactly sure why, because obviously there was a lot of music being made, same as everywhere, at every time. But if you were doing a Victorian period piece, there's no specific musical style you could use that would be musical shorthand for the era. So the UK has a ton of folk music, but nothing that serves as a national folk music. As for Italy and Germany, it's only in the late 19th century that they became unified nations. Maybe that makes it difficult to find folk music that feels like it represents the modern nation rather than some distant pre-national past. Okay, so let's finally get back to Norway. What is this self-image that they hold on to, and what kind of folk music might complement that? You might expect Norway to be fixated on their Viking heritage. I mean, did you see the way that Alexander Skarsgård grabbed that spear from midair and then killed the guy with it? And certainly, Viking metal is a big thing over there. But interestingly, I don't think that Norway has ever sent any song that's Viking-inspired to Eurovision. The higher ground guy was Denmark, we checked. But take another look at Alexander Rybak. The fiddle and the clothes feel 19th century, right? So as it turns out, Norway had something called the National Romance era during the mid-1800s. This was a movement largely driven by cultural elites trying to define a distinctly national Norwegian identity separate from Denmark and Sweden. Asbjørnsen and Moe started gathering fairy tales, Ivar Aasen studied dialects to standardize the language, and there was a lot of celebration of the farmers. You get tons of paintings of these common people wearing bunads and sometimes even holding fiddles. So when Alexander Rybak sings about fairy tales while wearing simple 19th century clothes and playing his unaging little heart out, he's embodying this national self-image that was carefully crafted to make the case for Norwegian independence. And I might argue that even though Ulveham sounds wildly different from Fairytale, it actually evokes the same national romance period. Look at that instrument right at the beginning. That's the nyckelharpa, a classic 19th century instrument. And the singing in the chorus is a style known as kulning, or cow call. It's an agrarian folk music that was a crucial part of the new national identity. Now, the song itself is a medieval ballad, but that doesn't make it a medieval-inspired song. That makes it a national romance song, because this was a period all about celebrating folklore. If you're not convinced, check out the band's 2021 album, Til Nord. It's entirely acoustic, and it comes out of this 19th century folk tradition.
And we have these two badass guys dancing really twisted version of traditional holding dance.
They even worked closely with Knut Buen, a fiddle player who is one of the greatest folk musicians in Norway.
He's almost like a band guru of some sort. He's a big man in every sense.
So basically, Ulveham is a medieval ballad wrapped in a 19th century musical tradition wrapped in modern rock songs. It's like an inception of Norwegian nostalgia.
You had no right. This was the only way to go 3 layers deep.
Both Ulveham and Fairytale share a reverence for the same romantic period in the nation's history. Come to think of it, so did Elf Dance, the song from 2006. It too combined fiddle music with folklore, which seems to be to Norwegians what a big hat and belt buckle is for Americans. On the other hand, it might be a lot simpler than that. Maybe Norwegians just think folk music is cool. After all, a bunch of North Sami songs have done well at MGP over the years. And that's a minority subculture that most Norwegians aren't a part of. And in 2011, they sent a song partially in Swahili. Stella Mwangi didn't qualify at Eurovision, but Norwegians loved this song. It was #1 on the charts there for 4 weeks. So, is there any validity to the idea that some folk music styles are better aligned with the national identity than others, and those are more likely to get the turbo folk treatment? You tell us in the comments. Other Matt and I are just a couple of Americans who barely understand our own country. But we're always trying to learn. We'll see you next time. The bailiwick of Guernsey is a self-governing British Crown dependency off the coast of Normandy, France, comprising several of the Channel Islands. Huh, you learn something new every day when you overthink Eurovision.